Father, we welcome your presence. Holy Spirit, you're welcome in this place. Would you give us favor? Would you give us wisdom to make decisions rightly, to make wise decisions? Would you give us favor in this city, in this town? Give us protection. Open doors. Make it obvious the directions you want us to go. We love you and we trust you. In Jesus' name, amen and amen.
Amen.
We're going to open our meeting tonight for March 5th, 2019. And we do have someone that has signed up to speak in open forum. So, Mr. Early, would you like to come up and tell us a little bit about what you'd like to talk to us about?
Well, I didn't really mean to get on the platform. I meant to be down here on the Rachel County.
Okay.
I apologize to you.
Not a
didn't
problem.
read the
I should have caught
instructions.
that myself. Not a problem at all. That sounds good. Okay, we'll move on to our consent agenda. If anyone would like to pull something, now would be the time to do that for some further discussion. And if not, the chair will entertain a motion for approval.
I'll make a motion. We approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, moved and seconded. If no further discussion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those saying no, motion passes. Our regular agenda, number 5, consider the ordinance of the City of Nacogdoches amending, we're going to talk about the smoking ordinance. I'm not going to read that entire thing, if that's all right. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Because you know I will, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, council members, Jeff Davis, City Attorney. It's my very great honor to appear before you on this particular agenda item. Before you at this time are some amendments to our current ordinance regarding smoking pollution control. Just a brief history, as you'll recall, at our last council meeting, there was a presentation by Healthy Nacogdoches Coalition concerning the usage of e-cigarettes or electronic smoking devices. After that presentation and deliberation by council, there was a unanimous vote instructing staff to move forward with amendments to our current ordinance, which would provide for a prohibition on these electronic smoking devices in the same locations that I guess we'd say traditional smoking is now prohibited. So we move forward with that. The proposed ordinance before you, really the meat of it can be found in the definition section, and that's really where we address this. And it incorporated these particular changes to address e-cigarettes, which are deemed or defined as electronic smoking devices. So we inserted a portion within the definition section of Chapter 46 addressing these matters. And then we also amended the definition of smoking itself in the ordinance to include electronic smoking devices. I would say, for purposes of uniformity, with regard to the existing ordinance, there is a section carved out that allows for smoking in retail tobacco stores. So for purposes of uniformity, we did create a mirror provision to allow for the use of electronic smoking devices in retail vape shops, essentially, that would deal in mechanisms or devices or substances dealing with electronic smoking devices. And we did provide for a definition of a retail store, electronic smoking device retail store. Madam Mayor, members of the council, that largely constitutes the amendments that we've made, and hopefully we've achieved what we were instructed to do. At this time, I will step to the side if there are any public comments, and afterwards I'll certainly return for any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to this issue? Yes, Mrs. Barton. Good evening.
I'm
Come-
Kim Barton. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm Kim Barton. I was the one that spoke with you earlier last month, and I would just like to say we really appreciate you considering our request, and we hope that you will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. We will close comments from the gallery, I guess, the people, our audience here. And council members, any comments or further questions? Yes.
Well, the ordinance is basically, we are saying that the smoking is harmful to not only the person and anybody else in the room. Is that correct?
That's right. Secondhand smoke is certainly a problem. That was contemplated in the enactment of the original ordinance, and certainly I think additional studies now that e-cigs or vaping has been around for some time have shown that there's some dangerous nature to that as well, and that was certainly well presented last week, our last council meeting by Healthy Nacogdoches Coalition. We appreciate that very much. And so this is a health safety issue, a continuation of the purpose of the original ordinance on banning smoking in public places.
3 or 4 months ago, I had no idea about vaping, but I got a call from a friend in Houston that was looking for a lawyer. Her grandson had been arrested for, he had a e-cigarette, but I think it was like TCH or THC or something he was putting in this pipe. And after that, I decided to do some research on the e-cigarettes, and of course, John Hopkins, you know, in Maryland, yeah, I think
Yes,
that's
sir.
where I was filming. They come up with like 5 basic things about e-cigarettes and vaping, and that one of them is it's less harmful than the cigarettes. But that's being said on the short-term effects, because on long-term we don't really know. You know, they're saying like there's 7,000 chemicals in a regular cigarette, but they hadn't determined that in the long term on vaping. And they determined that the electronic cigarettes are just as addictive as the traditional cigarettes, only we don't know what's in the vapor cigarettes. And that electronic cigarettes are not the best way to quit smoking. And it was determined that most people went to e-cigarettes in order to stop smoking. But one of the things that they found out that was sort of a new generation is what they're saying is getting hooked on e-cigarettes, and that 40% of the young adults that don't smoke is now smoking e-cigarettes, which is, to me, is not a good thing. I mean, from my understanding, all the ingredients that goes in, some of them may not be nicotine, but we don't know what the other ingredients are. But in my opinion, I agree with the ordinance, mainly because it's secondhand and we don't know what it is. So that's just my thoughts on it.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. I agree. Probably the best way to stop smoking is just that: stop
Yeah.
smoking.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Anything you'd like to add? Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the ordinance as written.
I make a motion to approve the ordinance as it is written.
I'll second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Number 6, receive the Nacogdoches County Exposition and Civic Center Annual Report. Hi, Anita Scott, how are you?
Good afternoon. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Good.
Again, my name is Anita Scott. I'm the director for the Nacogdoches County Expo and Civic Center. And today I'm here to present to you an overview of our last fiscal year and look ahead at what we have coming for 2019. But I'd like to begin by recognizing my small but talented staff for their enthusiasm and creativity. Our events, as you know, is varied from in size and scope, and often requiring outstanding problem-solving skills and group collaboration. We've had to make it, fake it, break it, and all just to get it done sometimes. But we've done it, and I'm very proud of my staff. Karen Klein is our event coordinator and marketing and everything in between. So I'd like to recognize Karen Klein. She's with me. Not present here today is our administrative assistant, Claire Hodges. Our maintenance team is Brad Hale, Daryl Hill, Kent O'Neill, and our event part-time worker, Linda Parker, is also on our staff, and also our sheriff's deputy, Jason Mullenberg. That's our little small staff, but they're great staff, and I am very proud to have them stand by me and I'm very honored to have them. Our mission is the support of the youth, agriculture, and community. And throughout the year, we hosted the Region 5 high school and junior high rodeos. The Agri Extension Office used our facility multiple times this year to host programs to educate people on everything from hay to protecting our water supply. Our facility also provided a location for meetings, trainings, and banquets from both city and county employees, or for them, and also city and county law enforcement and the American Red Cross. The Nacogdoches County Exposition and Civic Center, as you well know, serves a multitude of functions for the people of Nacogdoches. In our fiscal year for 2017-2018, we hosted 133 events. 97 of those were one-day events, 17 were two-day events, and 19 were multiple-day events. Our estimated attendance for those events was 82,500 guests, generated just under 4,000 overnight hotel stays, and over 1,000 overnight RV stays at our facility. We, with the help of Joanna over at the CVB, we were able to use Global Destinations program to calculate our economic impact, and that we were very grateful for that. It was quite eye-opening for us to see what our impact has made on Nacogdoches. And so they calculated our based off of a spreadsheet that we gave them of our events and how many was in attendance, how many hotels. They were able to calculate that, and they calculated our direct business sales at $4.5 million, and that's gas, meals, retail, recreation, lodging, those kind of things. And our total economic impact, which includes indirect and induced income, was $6.3 million. That just surprises me that we were able to do that through our events. But I'm proud of that. We'd also like to thank and recognize Joanna Temple and the CVB staff. Joanna is one of the first calls that we make when we're having events, and she is always so grateful and are so helpful in helping us to roll out the red carpet for our event promoters, and so we're thankful for that. She also invited us to an event held at the hotel. It was Destinations Marketing Principles, and there we were able to meet a lot of people that was in our industry, and it was just really good to get to hear those speakers, and it kind of helped me to realize sometimes we take advantage of even our employees. So it kind of helped me to think about my employees and being able to show them more appreciation for the hard work that they do. So, and then I was able to also meet a lady that we were talking about events and things, and we had never done a dog show. And I mentioned that in this meeting, and she was like, "Oh, I have. We've done it," because we didn't know what to expect. So we were able to meet somebody from a different county, and that was really good. So I'm thankful to Joanna that she invited us to come. It was great, and we enjoyed it very much. We'd also like to recognize the Nacogdoches Chamber of Commerce staff, Wayne Mitchell and Kelly Augustine and Barbara Hall, for their commitment and dedication to economic growth and prosperity for Nacogdoches County. They are always so willing to help us promote our events. And with that being said, I'd like to share with you our latest joint endeavor. This year, with the support of the CVB, the Chamber of Commerce, Fish and Steel Equipment, Bowles Feed, and Mr. John Mast, our town and the Nacogdoches Pro Rodeo and Steer Show will be featured on a TV show called Special Cowboy Moments on the RFD TV channel. And so we're excited about that. An interview of Mr. John Mast and Mr. Tony Dawson will also be on the Wild Rides TV show aired on the Cowboy Channel. This is an effort to promote our pro rodeo and, of course, the city of Nacogdoches as a tourist destination. We are working hard to make 2019 eventful, and in your handout, I think you should find a list of some of the events we have scheduled this year. We are working with several innovative promoters as we speak to bring new events to Nacogdoches, and We will like to encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Facebook for more information on events happening at the Expo Center. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer them. But thank y'all for having me. We are so thankful for the opportunity to be here and for your support of the Nacogdoches County Exposition and Civic Center. Thank y'all.
Hold on just a moment.
Okay.
Is there anyone here that would like to say anything to Anita or ask anything? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Council, questions or comments?
Just one comment.
Yes.
Best place to get a bacon wrapped jalapeno pepper.
Yeah, I agree, Uncle Ray's.
yeah, she
Yes,
is.
yes. You know, I want to say one other thing, if you allow me.
Of course.
You know, we're getting ready for the Nacogdoches Pro Rodeo and Steer Show, as I mentioned. And on Thursday night of the rodeo, we are going to recognize each department, law enforcement agency department within Nacogdoches. So we're working on that, and so from the Nacogdoches Sheriff to the City of Nacogdoches Chief Police Mr. Jim Seavey, the Stephen F. Austin State University, PD, every agency, the game wardens, the DPS, even Garrison and Constables 1, 2, 3, and 4 will also be recognized on the floor and at the Pro Rodeo and Steer Show, March 21st through the 23rd.
Terrific. Well,
Yay.
we appreciate you coming and doing this.
Thank
This
you.
means a great deal
Yes.
to us,
Yeah.
And we love partnering with you.
Thank
and
you.
so please extend our thanks to your staff.
I will.
and
Thank you,
Keep
ma'am.
doing a good job.
Thank you. Thank y'all.
Of course,
Thank
of
you.
course. Okay. Number 7, we are going to consider the ordinance regarding control of backflow and cross connections. Good evening, Mr. Bartlett.
Evening, Mayor and Council. Steve Bartlett, City Engineer. Tonight I have for your consideration the adoption of an ordinance, or actually a modification to our existing ordinance, Section 106, which is utilities, which is a huge section. So we come to you with a lot of modifications in that section periodically. This will be specifically for the control of backflow and cross connections. So as you recall, we've been in front of you several times over the last 6 months and told you that we've been working with TCEQ in developing a new and improved program to control cross connections and backflow prevention. And so as part of a work plan we gave them, included kind of up in our game with ordinances. Currently, we were really enforcing, if you will, backflow prevention and cross connections only through the National Plumbing Code, which has some minimalistic language in it, as well as our service agreement, which is the agreement you sign when you get a meter. And it has some notes at the bottom that basically say you've got to prohibit cross connections. But other than that, we were pretty weak on what we were, other than just some unwritten policies. So TCEQ strongly suggested that we develop this. It was a great idea, and that's what you have before you is a kind of a from-scratch version. Mayor, if you will, I'm going to run through just some highlights of it. I know it's kind of a little bit of a technical ordinance. Basically, this defines or gives us the definition of devices in several things. Because it's kind of half technical, sometimes we need to define what an air gap was or what a reduced pressure zone backflow preventer meant, so that when we talk to the public, we have some written definitions they can use for reference. This basically specifically identifies all commercial applications are required to have backflow prevention and cross-connection prevention. We do exempt single-family and two-family residential structures, and this also outlines that, so everybody knows kind of how we're playing. If you have a apartment complex that's served with a master meter, it's considered a commercial connection for this purpose, so they have to play with devices and employ devices just like anybody else would in a business. This addresses CSI inspections, and if you remember 6 months ago or so, we came to you for some budget amendments to get some funds to do a bunch of inspections and get some outsourced help for that. And so we do those on all new construction. Before we give you a certificate of occupancy, we inspect and look for cross-connection potentials. But this actually documents that we need to do that, as opposed to us just doing it as part of our process. Identifies one thing that TCQ really brought to our attention was temporary service connections. And truthfully, we hadn't thought about this a whole lot. But when a contractor comes to a site and asks for temporary water service, or they have a hydrant meter, you see them screwing on a hydrant to temporarily get water, this mandates that they have to have backflow preventers, and those have to be tested and inspected. And so even building a house, so that's not a residential application in our mind, that's where he would have to have a temporary backflow preventer even to hook temporarily to water for house construction. So we had never outlined all those things, and we think that those are certainly probably the greater potential for contaminations during construction. So this outlines that. And I did say exempts residential. I want to say except for another ordinance that you passed a year and a half ago on irrigation, which does require, even in your yard for irrigation, does require backflow prevention. This identifies testing requirements. So annually, these backflow preventers are tested by a certified tester at the expense of the customer. Those reports are then filed with us now electronically. And if you remember, in January, we came to you to talk about that database management, and that's underway and is working well. So letters have gone out, and people are testing, and we're getting our arms wrapped around all that. But this ordinance specifically requires that, so that we now can follow that up. It gives a couple of pages of typical hazards. So for different occupancies in buildings, car washes or whatever, it may give you, hey, this is typically going to need this kind of backflow prevention. So it helps the public understand before we even do inspections what we're probably going to expect from them from their particular kind of business and how we rate them as a health hazard or a non-health hazard. Specifically, something we've needed for a long time is private water connections. There are a number of folks, although it's not real common, who have private water wells, even within the city limits. And they're allowed to do so, but connecting them into the same system with our water is prohibited. And so we didn't have a lot of enforcement other than just trying to go look for this. So this ordinance specifically identifies air gaps between those two. There can't be a connection with just a valve. They must be separate systems, and that's something we needed reinforcement for. One thing, and this is probably what the state has focused on us the most, is grandfathering. So we had a number of old and existing businesses who I guess we had treated more as a grandfathering on this. And there is no grandfathering for this. It's a health, life, safety issue, and there shouldn't be grandfathering. And so that's when I tell you we're up in our game. This is specifically where we're doing, is trying to find some older connections that probably predated any ordinances or any plumbing codes. And so this specifically says that you're not grandfathered and gives us the support to go to them with that. So lastly, it adds enforcement. So before, our only enforcement was at the bottom of your water service agreement and probably some things from the state legislature. But in general, we could shut your water off, and it was kind of weakly positioned. There was a process for it, and we could do it, and we have done it in hazard conditions. But generally speaking, this gives us enforcement in a financial nature as well. So it can even define misdemeanor event and have misdemeanor fines. And why would that be better than just shutting the water off? Well, if we have a non-health hazard event, so we may have an occupied multifamily residential who has a failed backflow preventer, and their test fails. We say, you need to get this fixed now, and they don't get it fixed. And 30 days later, we say, you need to get this fixed now, and they don't fix it. We don't really want to turn the water off to 500 apartments where we don't feel like there's an immediate threat. We want to negotiate getting this fixed. This allows us to have another avenue to leverage that, which is through fines. So will be a big benefit to us to have another way to approach that. So, Mayor, that's kind of my overview explanation. I'll be happy after public comment to answer any specific questions or other issues you want to address. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. Is there anyone here that has something to say about this? Or a comment, question? No? Okay. Council? Questions?
I've got a question.
Yes.
Sure.
So for the non-industrial applications, your apartments or your general business-owned buildings, what, in practice, what are we trying to prevent from getting back into the water supply?
Anything from a hose and a mop sink, in my previous office building, which you would think would be relatively benign from, having chemicals and risk. We had a mop sink and it happened to be in the ladies' restroom, which the ladies loved. But a hose in that mop sink connected into a bucket, the mop bucket, if the water gets shut off outside and the pressure drops, guess what happens? That goes backwards. So those are real simple things. Restaurants and other facilities that might have carbonated drink machines. That carbonation can literally go backwards and contaminate the water. You think I drink carbonated, but it's a very controlled way to do it. So things like that. Ice machines that have connections either have to have air gaps or special backflow preventers. So in just a regular office environment, we may have some minor things interior to your building, fixtures that need to be addressed just to protect the main water system and the customers in the building.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you'd already started doing some inspections or having them
Yes.
done and dealing with some members of the public. So
Correct.
things are going pretty well? Don't have
They,
any-
they are, and surprisingly well, and I think last time I told you, nobody had thrown anything or sent threats to my house yet, and that was really good. We were actually very surprised, and I probably shouldn't be, but we had overwhelming support from this, and these are folks that are writing checks to fix the problems. And
Right.
so most of the questions and calls we got is, can you help me figure out how to do it, or where to go? Can you come out? And so our folks have been going and helping them just position things or come up with alternatives. You know, it's hard to retrofit some of these things, and so we have some pretty creative guys. So far, yeah, we've had a really, really good response, and I don't know that anybody sent me a Christmas card for it, because they did have to write a check. But nobody's been angry, and everybody's, in fact, has complimented us on probably, again, upping our game in protecting the water system.
Okay. Is that it? Any more questions? No?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bartlett. Okay, well, the chair will entertain a motion for approval of the ordinance.
I'll make a motion that we pass agenda item number 7 as it's written.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. If no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. And number 8, consider a resolution of the city supporting legislation relating to the abolishment of perpetual care trust funds for cemeteries. Good evening, Mr. Jeffers.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council. In 1946, the city created Sunset Memorial Park Cemetery. Then in 1954, the City Council, I'm positive with the best intentions, created a perpetual care fund. Sunset is the only cemetery that the city has that has a perpetual care fund. Oak Grove does not have one. Pine Grove does not have one. One of the problems with the perpetual care statutes, and I would submit that they're outdated, is that they are convoluted. They create a very difficult bookkeeping system for us. It's really unclear as to how we can use the money, and then also it restricts our investment options. And when you think about it, for the 50-plus years that we've had the Perpetual Care Fund, there is only a little less than $300,000 in the account. You can't do much with the interest income, especially nowadays, off of $300,000. But because of the restrictions and the confusion, more years than not, we don't spend the money because we don't want to run afoul of state law. We spoke with Representative Clardy, asking if he would work with us, and he has introduced legislation. It is bracketed so that it is a local bill, and typically you bracket legislation to keep it from being statewide, to avoid any significant controversy and debate. If this amendment passes, and by the way, it's not the first time the statute has been amended exempting a municipality. If it passes, then the City Council has at that point the opportunity to say, yes, we're going to abolish the fund, or no, we're not going to abolish the fund. Just because the legislation passes, the City Council has to take an affirmative action to abolish the fund. If the fund is eliminated, the money has to be spent on Sunset Cemetery. It can't be spent on any of the other cemeteries. It can't be spent to give the city attorney a raise or for any other purpose. It has to be spent on Sunset Cemetery. We have a pretty substantial list of projects that we think are worthy. City Council, with public input, would make the final decision as to how those monies are spent or whether or not you want to hold on to them. That is a council decision. But we have roadways that need to be repaved. We need to install new roadways and new sections of the cemetery. We have a piece of property that was donated that needs to be cleared and graded and a fence put up to get it prepared for burials. And then we have constant requests for benches and landscaping and additional lighting. That is only a partial list. There are other items that could certainly be up for consideration. What the City Council is being asked tonight is to adopt a resolution in support of the legislation. If you choose not to do that, in all probability, Representative Clardy will pull the legislation down and it goes away, and then you will not have the option or the opportunity for the option for the trust fund to be eliminated, and then you don't have the option as to how the monies would be spent. Cities are supposed to be in perpetuity. I'm not aware of any Texas city that has filed bankruptcy, but I'm sure there's probably some out there, but they're reorganized, they don't go away. So just because the perpetual care fund is eliminated, it does not relieve the city of its responsibility to perpetually maintain Sunset Cemetery, just like we have a responsibility to maintain Oak Grove and Pine Grove. That does not change. And frankly, council is aware that for what we charge for burials does not cover the cost of taking care of the cemeteries. Therefore, the cemeteries' budgets are subsidized by tax dollars, including Sunset, and that's not going to change. All that the legislation will do, it will give the council the opportunity to spend that $300,000 on Sunset, and then we don't have to set aside any additional monies, and then it will operate just like Oak Grove and Pine Grove. Madam Mayor, that concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to engage in further discussion after public comment.
Thank you. So, Mr. Early, would you like to come say a few words for us?
Mayor and members of the City Council, I'm Bill Early, and most of you may know that I'm a retired lawyer. And I saw this in the paper, and it bothered me. First thing is that it's a trust fund, perpetual, and the people who have put people in their bought grave sites for them have contributed to this trust fund. It says since '54, so that's 60 some odd years. The fund goes into a trust, and I don't know how much money. It said it's $260 some odd thousand. Over 65 years, I'm not sure that trust is growing anything. You've got the right to spend for the maintenance for the cemeteries what it makes. You would expect, maybe not, but I would expect over 65 years that there would be more than that in there because of the increase in value of stocks or whatever is used. And if it's not stocks, you may not be able to use that. I haven't looked at that. I haven't had time to, but you would expect the principal to have increased more than just what people are putting into it. I don't know, this may be premature before you do it, but I think you ought to be aware that is one thing is a contract is part of it, the value is another. Third thing is, part of it is the actual maintenance that is gonna be done, the city may or may not, 20 years from now, who's gonna be up here? Who's gonna be over here with Mr. Jeffries just to see that things are taken care of? You would expect it to be looked after, but there's no guarantees. The trust fund provides that there will be at least some money to take care of it. And so that I just want you to be aware that there may be some problems with it, as I see it, trying to do away with a trust fund. The trust fund is like a contract, and people put it in there for perpetual. And if it's not, it's not. And I'm not sure what would happen. So I want you to be aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. for
Do you
your
have any
comments.
questions?
I don't think so right now. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to say anything about this? Nope. Council, questions for Mr. Jeffers?
I have one question. How much is it based on per site as the funding? How much is each site?
Yeah, each plot, and don't hold me to this, and Mr. Bray's not here, but if memory serves correctly, for each grave site we sell, 40 cents goes into the trust. It's not that much money.
Is that a one-time fee?
One-time fee, doesn't repeat.
Oh, okay. Now, as far as, maintenance, repaving roadways, that fund does not cover that? The perpetual fund does not cover maintenance?
It covers maintenance, but there's not enough money there to cover the maintenance. And also, it's debatable as to what we can actually do with the money. So more times than not, in order to be safe, we leave it alone because we can't draw down that much money.
The only reason why I asked that question, we states that there's 200,000 plus in there. But, and then we're looking at, we needed repairs made at the cemetery, and why we're not using that fund?
Can't. The corpus, Mr. Early's absolutely right. Corpus has to be left alone. You can't do anything with that. If the legislation passes, then you have access to the corpus. And I know I'm repeating myself, but it has to be spent on Sunset. It can't be spent anywhere else.
And it can't be invested.
Well, it can be invested. So if you want to, say, formally do away with the trust, create your own in trust, but you have to remember that we can't invest in stocks. That's prohibited.
Right.
So our investments are pretty conservative, basically treasury bills. And I never thought that I would be excited about an interest rate of 2%. But interest rates have been near zero for so long. Now all of a sudden you got a 2% interest rate, and looking at all of our funds, all of a sudden there's a number there that makes a difference, where in the past it was nothing.
Okay, in layman's terms, the money that we have in the trust fund now, what can you use that money for?
You could probably use it to buy a lawnmower. I don't know that we can do much more than that. And it's because of the language of the trust. I said, I don't question the motives of the council that implemented the trust. I'm sure they thought it was a great idea. I am a little bit curious, if the trust was a great idea, then why didn't we implement it on Oak Grove and also on Pine Grove? But I don't know that we will have an answer to that. But I think that that's part of what adds to why we scratch our head. And there are needs at the cemetery, but we're limited as to how we can use that money. And a classic example is if you have a trust, you have to use those proceeds from the grave sites that generated the trust. So if you're talking about expanding the cemetery, you can't use that money.
And that's now the way it is now, but if legislation passes, it would be different.
If the legislation passes and then the council chooses to do away with the trust, you can do whatever you wish with the money as long as it is spent on Sunset. And if you want to leave a trust in place and you want to develop your own rules, then the city council has that option. But Mr. Early's absolutely right. If you say, let's leave the trust in place, you're going to adopt your own rules, a future council can change that. What the council giveth, the council can taketh away. One of the advantages of the trust from state law, you can't do anything with it, except for in this particular instance, if the proposed legislation passes.
If we were to pass this, then it passes at the state level, and then we spend the $300,000 on a park bench, what governs our obligation to maintain that property? Is it the same as any park that we have, or are there other statutes in place to?
It's the same as we have the obligation for the other cemeteries. You know, it's in perpetuity with or without the trust. Now, level of maintenance can change. I can't, well, Mr. Early's right that if the council, a city manager wants to change the level of care in the future, they have the authority to do it, but can you imagine what would happen if we were to provide less maintenance for Oak Grove Cemetery? And I think the same applies for Sunset, and the same applies for Pine Grove. There is a expectation, and I would say pretty much a demand from the citizens, you're going to take care of our cemeteries. And that's where I would suggest a high level of confidence that the citizens are not going to allow the city to limit its level of care. And if anything, they're going to tell us to increase it. We've had discussions because of citizen requests that, especially when we had the drought record, about putting a irrigation system in all the cemeteries. Well, when you have a drought record, that's not the time to put in a irrigation system. But as you might imagine, an irrigation system would be pretty expensive. Plus, you have the cost of the water. But that's an example of where, you know, there could be substantial support at some point in time to put in an irrigation system. So I would suggest, and you know, for those who have family members buried out there in any of the cemeteries, you're in the best position to say, I'm not going to accept any level of care for the cemetery other than what we have now. Madam Mayor, the city attorney has been biting his lip. and
I noticed it. He keeps looking at me and he looks back at you.
Yeah, I've refused to look at him. But he would like to say something.
Well,
You don't have to let me.
I know, I'm thinking about it. No, you go. Go right ahead,
Just very briefly.
of course.
Of course, and I'm going to start by saying, Mr. Bill Early is one of the finest folks that I have the privilege of knowing. And Nacogdoches is a lot better place for Bill Early. And he's forgotten more trust law than I ever knew in the first place. And everything he said is exactly right. However, with this particular trust, it is so tied down on our abilities to invest that it cannot generate the funds a traditional trust would. Matter of fact, if Ms. Kerbo, I don't know that she's here, I think that annually this doesn't generate more than $3,000 a year. So if it is done away with, those monies have to go into permanent improvements to that cemetery, to Sunset, and you have in place in your ordinances currently that we perpetually care for all of our cemeteries. And if you think of the minimus amount we generate off this trust fund, even if you left it in place and a future council decided not to continue perpetual care, this would make no difference. That money is locked in this trust that it's not really serving its original intention. I will say this, I think there was a question, a good one, about how this came to be. I did go back and do some research, and I don't know this absolutely answers that question, but back in 1954, in reading the minutes from that meeting, there was actually there were competing petitions that were circulating. One was to have the Sunset Cemetery sold to a private interest. The other competing petition was for the city to maintain that and for it to remain a city cemetery. And the petition for it to remain obviously carried the day. More folks signed up on that. And at that same meeting is the time this trust went into play. And so what I would imagine happened was it was put into place, and I'm just trying to read the tea leaves, as an assurance that there would be some level of care dedicated going forward. But if one tries to read, it almost contradicts itself, portions of that trust, and it's horribly convoluted on what those funds can be used for, and it generates this very, very minimum at best, if any, return. So this would free those funds up, allow for permanent improvement that couldn't be had otherwise, and it frees up these locked funds and allows their intended purpose to be used, and the city has the duty for perpetual care. If that was abandoned in the future, regardless of this trust, it would make really zero difference.
One question, and you mentioned permanent improvement. That's the sites, the lots, plats that's in place right now. If you added on to Sunset, that wouldn't apply to that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Councilmember Bolden. It would. Mr. Jeffers did, I think, a good job of setting out. It wasn't an absolute list, but it gave a good flavor. You could use it for roads. You could use it for lighting. You could use it for this improvement to this new section that we've recently acquired. And so all the above, if it's a permanent improvement, it could be used for that. But in closure, I greatly respect Mr. Early's thoughts, and they're very good thoughts and go right to the heart of this. But given the nature of this trust, those funds really can't be used anyway. They're generating, a 1% return, really, at best. And it won't affect the long-term perpetual care future for the cemetery, regardless of what council might be in place 20 years from now.
Any other questions for Mr. Davis?
I was curious about when they do a law that's only specific for one area. Why don't they do it for the entire state?
That's a good question. Sometimes you see these bracketed bills that, that address, it's done on population. If you look at this, it's kind of interesting. It's not only population, I think it's a county with 40 to 80, but also contains a portion of the Angelina National Forest, which was a pretty good one to see. The legislature at some point may open that up and give that opportunity. They may not. It just depends
Is that a
on,
common thing to do, to write laws just for one particular area?
I've seen it time and time again, but there's actually a prohibition on saying Nacogdoches specifically.
What about a
And-
city that starts with N
And it could be, yeah. It's a good question.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Well, it is an emotional, can be an emotional issue. Because when
Absolutely.
people do purchase those, they are in an emotional state. And I actually have
Absolutely.
grandparents, a husband and a daughter out there, and plan on that being my final resting place, if that's what that is. So there is a concern when he talks about the people that have an investment out there.
Absolutely.
That they understand that this is not going to change the care. It will actually probably enhance it
It will further it
and further it
for
for the
permanent,
future.
for permanent improvements to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for letting me talk.
Got the power. So if there's no further discussion, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
We could, I mean, is there any reason, I mean, I'm not real comfortable, I mean, I'm not against this, but I just don't understand it. And, I mean, is there any reason not to wait on it, or, you know, just to put it off? I mean, it's been like this for a long time. Is there any rush just to, you know, maybe look at it again next week, next meeting? I mean, I don't see any hurry.
That's a good question. Of course, the Texas legislature meets from January to May.
Yeah.
And things progress at a very rapid pace. You know, it could certainly be tabled, but, one, I don't know if that would send a message and would carry this forward. Two, time is absolutely of the essence anytime you have a bill pending at the Texas legislature.
I'll make a motion, we adopt the resolution of the City of Nacogdoches, Texas, supporting legislation relating to the abolishment of the perpetual care trust funds for cemeteries maintained by certain size municipalities by the 86th Legislative Session.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. If no further discussion?
I just say, this falls into the category of one of those things that doesn't seem like there's a big hurry. I mean, maybe they don't do it this legislature, but I hate when things are brought to us that have been like a particular way for years and years and decades, and now all of a sudden we need to make a decision, you know, after looking at it for a few minutes. And there's also, you know, people may hear about this in the paper, and we may have different opinions. And, you know, this just falls into one of those categories of things that there's no sense in, you know, rushing to what, in my mind, I'm not against it. I just don't understand it enough to be for it.
Okay. Any other discussion? Although-
I will say that
go
I have had some discussion and done some research on this, and effectively all it would do, you know, assuming it is passed at the state level and then council approves the dissolution of the trust, it would basically just put it on equal footing with the other city-owned and maintained cemeteries, and give us an amount of money that could be used to improve that cemetery.
What happened? Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, see, I understand technically that's probably a good idea, but what happens if some people become, you know, upset about it? You know, their feelings are hurt. They're not even really rational about their decision, but they just feel because, you know, their relatives are out there that they wanted to have a say, and that they would feel that this was just kind of rushed through and they didn't have a chance to say anything. And
Well,
it's a question, not so much is it a good idea or bad idea, it's probably a good idea.
the easy answer is that the current trust is generating an unusable amount of money.
Yeah. I understand.
So it is sitting there for little or no purpose. And it could be put to good use. I think that's the main impetus behind creating the legislation and this resolution in support of the legislation is that there's no point in just leaving the money sitting there. It is, you know, each plot has a very small contribution. It is a contribution to the trust, certainly. But I don't think that, you know, having that amount of money to improve the cemetery is a violation of the contract or the trust that people placed in the city in originally contributing to that with the purchase of a plot.
I would agree with that.
And if I could possibly, Councilmember Moore, address that issue. If the legislature passes this bill,
We still have a chance.
absolutely. So this is, and you have a good point to, you know, to study on it, but this would not, the passage of this by the legislature doesn't mean the trust goes away. That's only step one. It only creates an avenue, whether the council, how the council chooses to exercise or not exercise that avenue is up to the council at a future time. But it would be, at the earliest, it would be months and months and months before, you know, before this would go into effect to even open up that opportunity.
All right, well, you talked into it.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. Agenda item number 9, receive a report about our Human Resources Department. Mr. Pearl, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Stephen Pearl, Human Resources Director, here to give you our annual report for the Human Resources Office. Go over a little information about the department and then go over some of our updated employment statistics for the city. So the main functions of the Human Resources Office are employment, compensation and benefits, payroll, policy development and compliance, workers' compensation, training, employee reporting, employee relations, and a lot more that are not listed. Our office is also right across the hall here, and we are the first office that new people to City Hall usually run into, and so our staff does a great job providing customer service to anybody on anything that they may need, whether it's trying to get to the water department or public works or things like that. We have a staff of 4, director, assistant director, payroll coordinator, and an office assistant. We do multiple events throughout the year, and these are some of our main events that we have here on this PowerPoint. Open enrollment is for our employees to sign up for benefits or make any changes to their benefits. We do that once a year. We have employee appreciation luncheon. We do our employee service pins for our employees, provide them with a lunch. Also, Anita and her group at the Expo has been great, allowing us to have that at the Expo. It's a big space for us to all gather at. This past year, we combined that with our flu shot clinic. We talked about it at department head meetings and tried to see if we can get more participation since everybody's going to be there for lunch anyway. So we did our flu shot clinic there. We provide retirees also with a flu shot for free. And chats with the city manager. We assist with that. City manager makes his rounds to the different departments throughout the year, and it's just a chance to kind of update the employees on what's going on in the city and allows the employees to ask or talk about anything on their mind with the city manager.
That's one of the most popular things you do, isn't it?
It is. Always learn something from. Different types of training events as well. We have a training tomorrow. I have that listed later, but succession planning training tomorrow at the Recreation Center. I think we have 32 people signed up to attend that. Supervisors, high potential employees, and so we're excited about that opportunity. Personnel cost. I know that you are aware of these costs because you all set the budget, but I put this in here just to show how big of a chunk the personnel cost is to the budget. So it's 78% of the general fund is for personnel expenses, which that includes their pay, benefits, workers' comp, employment taxes, and all of that. And then the 4 major operating funds, the general fund, utility fund, sanitation, and airport. 53% of that is for personnel cost. Budgeted positions. We currently have 347 budgeted positions, 23 part-time, 324 full-time. And as of last month, we had 333 employees, 19 part-time, 314 full-time. And we actually have a total of 33 departments in the city, and the newest department is the development office that was added this budget year. So. Okay. Applications. In 2018, we received 1,248 applications and filled 81 positions. And compared to 2017, we received 843 applications and filled 77 positions. So that gives us average this year about 15 applications per position. And the biggest thing that was new last year was our online job applications. And so out of all those applications we received, 82% of them were from online job applications. So it just makes it a lot easier for potential employees or job seekers to get their application. They just fill it out online, hit submit, and it sends it to us. So it makes it a lot easier than having to come in and fill out a paper application. So we're happy about that. Turnover rates for 2018 are full-time, 8.47%, which is down from the 2017 number of 10.87%. I don't know exactly why. I know we're trying to do as much as we can to just any type of retention and working with our employees, and police department's been full staffed besides dispatch, but the officer positions have been full staffed, which is great. And then full and part-time combined is also down about 1%, 14.88% last year to 13.8% this year. And while these numbers are down, I think it's important to point out that just about every department does struggle to fill positions, whether it's the blue-collar jobs or the white-collar positions. It's just we are getting more applications, but the qualified applicant pool has really shrunk. And so it's just very important for us to consider all options to retain our employees and to be an attractive workplace for new employees. So, same as last year, 23% of our employees are eligible for retirement. So 72 out of the 314 full-time employees are currently eligible. And while they may be eligible, it does not necessarily mean that they are ready to retire or that they can afford to retire. But it's important just to have that number in the back of our heads. Exit interviews. We do exit interviews when someone leaves employment with the city, just to try to get some information from them on their job, their position, the city, what their thoughts were, just to use that feedback to hopefully make any improvements if needed. We did change last year from a paper fill out every question to we put it on Google Docs now, so we can type up the exit interview, and so it helps us with reporting and things like that when somebody leaves. We conducted one more exit interview this year than we did last year. And again, it is the employee's choice whether they do an exit interview. We do not make them, so that doesn't necessarily reflect the people that left employment with the city of Nacogdoches. Both of these are the same as last year, but better opportunity was the main reason employees left the city employment, and this includes just another job or more pay. And then the second reason was personal, just graduating, schools taking them somewhere else, an injury, relocating. And a lot of our turnover is because we have part-time positions that are mainly for the college students, especially Parks and Rec, part-time positions that they usually fill. And so they graduate, their semester changes or something like that, and so they move on and we fill that with someone else. Workers' comp claims. In 2018, we had 41. Again, same as last year, body motion or lifting was the most common type of injury reported. We only had 36 in 2017, so we have more this year, but nothing significant. And we are looking at these reports, and that's also one of the things we would like to do is just more safety training to address these issues to see if we can make any improvements in these areas. And my last slide here is things that we're working on, currently doing, I guess. Onboarding our orientation since September of last year. We actually are doing a more extensive onboarding type process. So the mayor and city manager actually have a video that they've made, and it's a welcoming video, and so we show that to all new hires. We go over just facts about the city, go over the 33 different departments, because there's actually been times where we've had employees leave and they didn't know we had an airport. And so now when the new employee comes on, we go, here's all that we have. We actually have some videos that Amy made, which she did a great job, that we show them of some of the bigger departments, just so they can get an idea. We go over important parts of the employee handbook with them, their benefits. We provide a safety training as part of the orientation, and then a harassment training. And those are the biggest changes. And basically just provide them with information where if they needed something, where they can go, and they take this big packet with them so they can refer back to it if they need to. Employee engagement, we do a couple things throughout the year, but this is the big one that we're working on, coming up with some additional engagement ideas. I mean, whether it's something as small as Employee of the Month, or having an ice cream truck show up and employees can go get an ice cream or something like that, or to some additional big annual event, Lake Day, or go to SFA's rec center and spend the day there, something like that, just to help out with retention. Like I said, succession planning, the training is scheduled for tomorrow and Thursday. And some of the topics are leadership, role of the supervisor, communication skills, managing, leading change. And so we're excited about that. And we look to continue these types of trainings more than just once a year or once every now and then. So. And then continue to look at additional training opportunities, like I said, safety training, succession planning, and then also develop somewhat of a in-house succession planning where we can take some of these topics and maybe like Chief CV could do the leadership topic. And that way we could meet our employee schedules a little bit better instead of pulling them away from the job for 2 days to sit in the training. So that's one of our goals. And then last on the list, a big one is the employee handbook. And just to go over a little timeline on that, we emailed that out on, I think after Thanksgiving, or right around Thanksgiving, to you all. And so if you've had a chance to look at that and start reviewing that, if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to myself or Mr. Jeffers or Mr. Davis, and we'll help you with those. And hopefully we'll get the employee handbook on one of the upcoming agendas, hopefully next agenda, and start discussions on that. It may take a couple of meetings to get through all that and get all the questions answered. It is a complete rewrite of our policy manual, but it's very similar to our current policy manual, but mainly just update some things, add in some additional requirements, but very similar to what we have now. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Is there anyone that has a comment about HR? Nope. Okay, council. Questions? Oh, come on. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Ward.
Go ahead.
You said it was hard to get people to apply for jobs or to find qualified people. Is that something that is across the state, across the nation because of low unemployment, or is there something unique to us?
Yes, sir. I do believe that has a impact, and I want to say Larissa has voiced that other businesses are kind of in the same boat throughout the city, and so I don't think it's unique to us, but I think it's a challenge for us in any way that we can make changes to improve getting new employees, and especially keeping the employees that we have. We should always consider those.
So do you know if it's other cities around are having the same thing, or is it just within this city it's a problem? I mean, I'm sure it's not just within the city.
I haven't not asked other cities. I did see some retention rates from the email threads I was on. I think it was a city close to Houston. Their actual turnover rate was greater than ours, and they said that that's new to them. And so when I saw that ours actually went down, I was pretty surprised about that. I do look at, you know, we post our jobs on TML, some of them, and so there's a lot of cities out there posting a lot of jobs. Seems just as frequently as us, but as far as speaking exactly for what they have going on, I don't know.
If I may, since I'm on the TMRS board and interact with lots of cities, the problem is statewide. There are a fair amount of discussions after and before the meeting about how can we improve the ability to recruit and retain other than throwing more money. So it is a statewide problem.
But also the problem may arise as to where private industry takes away a lot of employees that would normally come to a government position in a small town.
Well, that's true, except our industry is complaining about the same issue that we have. It's difficult for them to recruit and retain, from entry-level labor positions to mid-manage and upper management. It seems to be a universal problem.
Mid-manage on up is mostly a lot of resume builders. I mean, because for them to move up, they have to have something on their resume to say, I've got this experience in this level. Because when I was in a hiring position, you could tell the ones that was only going to be there a short time. They wanted that little experience, and they was gone to a higher position, and most likely.
Yeah, we thought the city attorney would be here for a short time, but we've been wrong.
Goodness.
Well,
Okay.
following that up, is there benefit to people, you know, coming in, working for, you know, a year or two, you know, because they're real ambitious, and then moving on? Does that bring new blood, new ideas coming into the city, as opposed to having somebody that stays in the same job for years and years? I mean, what's the dynamics of that kind of change?
Yes, I believe it can, and I'll use, I guess, the HR department for an example. The last office assistant that we had come in, you know, we were pretty sure he wouldn't be there that long, but he was very smart, very eager, and he got in there and did a lot for us in our department. And so even though he was only there right at a year, he accomplished a lot for our department and made his time worthwhile.
I guess there's certain jobs, you know, that there's a real steep learning curve. And there's other jobs that somebody can hit the ground running because they've already been doing that.
Right.
You know, if you're an engineer, you don't know how to use AutoCAD, there's a very steep learning curve to learn to use that software. But once you use it, then you've got it down. You're not going to forget how to use it. And so, you know, I've seen, you know, people coming and going. It isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, you're exactly right, and you're exactly right about the learning curve, and sometimes you invest more in certain positions than others. You know, like the police department has a recruit program that they offer, and so they would love for the officer to stay after they have spent the time and money and effort to get them to where they are an officer. So, yes.
You know, like in the private industry, middle management on up, AT&T would not hire anyone without a college degree. And it didn't matter what the degree was in, even though it's a telecommunication company, because they felt like a person with a college degree could, you know, he could manage any situation that comes up, and he could learn quicker. Gotcha. Now, they knew that person wasn't going to stay there very long, but if you was below middle management, they would hire you as if you had the experience, maybe not necessarily a college degree, but. And as far as being able to give to the existing employees there, the existing management team, it was not that great unless you was an engineer, and then usually those engineers could catch on real quickly in the telecommunication industry. But if you came in with MBA, then you was limited as what you could provide input with the company.
I got you.
You have anything? So we did a salary survey last year?
2016,
16?
actually, and we have gotten some updated numbers on some positions. TML does one, that they have a list of positions they do, so the last one of the full city was 2016.
But what you're saying then is that's really kind of an ongoing thing, because my
Yes.
follow-up question would be, when would be the next scheduled time to do it? But it's ongoing, so that's.
Yes, I think that needs to be our goal, to look at that a lot more often.
Right.
Just because, 2016 numbers are invalid now. So when we try
Sure.
to say, hey, here's the salary ranges, that's probably not the case anymore.
Okay. And my other question was the competitive teams that come out of the city that do really, really well, does that go through your office?
The corporate
Two?
challenge?
Yeah.
We do assist with that, but recreation is the one who puts
Okay.
all of that on, but we help with sign-ups and getting that information to the rec center, but
Okay.
they are the ones in charge of getting all that together.
Well, that's great, because the city's pretty well represented, and
Yes, yes.
they do quite well, so I'm pretty proud of that.
And employees really enjoy that, and
Yeah.
you all are also welcome to participate in that as well. So.
Well, anything else?
Yeah, workman comps. Is that number high, 41 workman comps in 1 year for the amount of employees we have?
I would say if we could lower that, that would be great. There's been times, looking at past history, when it's been higher than that. We have, the past few years, we've done really good on on injuries, and it's kind of brought our rate down. The last time I brought those our rates to you for that, so. It's something we need to keep in mind. A lot of those could be a injury. They slipped and fell, but they didn't need medical attention. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're paying a lot more in claims or things like that. And that's why I made a note that there was nothing significant in those 41 claims, even though it was more. And things like the officers being out, and if they are having to deal with a disgruntled person and that person fights them, then there's an injury and that has to be reported. So there are a number of things that are unavoidable, but there also are a lot of things that we should look at and see if we can impact and change and reduce the number.
And all of those are considered on-the-job injury, right?
Yes, sir.
And you have to report that to OSHA, maybe workman comp, Texas work.
To workers' comp. yeah.
Okay. Is there like, if they off the job so many days, maybe one day it's not considered a on-the-job injury? Is it just 1 day?
Yeah, anything that happens after hours or on their own or on the weekend is not an on-the-job injury. Now, if they
No, what I'm saying is, if they injured on the job and it doesn't require medical care, do you still have to report that?
Usually what we do is we go ahead and report that because in the past, what has happened is they lift up a manhole or something and they notice a back strain and they are fine, and then 2 weeks go by and then now it's bothering me. So the best thing for us to do is go ahead and report it so it's in the system. So if they come back 2 weeks later, there's not as many questions and we can get the ball moving on everything a lot quicker.
Okay, so it's up to the employees, even if.
We do have our policy for them to report any accident, no matter how slight it is. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? No. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all, Mike.
Thank Tara and your other staff members. Good job.
Will
Good
do. Thank you.
presentation. Executive session? No? Okay, well then, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for attending.